Hello, my friends. So, I have had access to the Shadows of Change beta patch for a few days now, gotten some time to play plenty of games, and I thought it would be time to start talking about and ranking how I think all of the new units are going to perform in Domination. So, a couple of disclaimers. We are only talking about units here, we're not talking about the Lords or the Heroes, just the more generic units, covering both the basic variants and the Regiments of Renown. And we're only ranking units for their usefulness on their primary roster. So things like the Incarnate Elemental of Beasts that's added to Kislev, but Beastmen also get it. We're just going to talk about how useful it is for Kislev, not for Beastmen. Although there may be some overlap. And as I said, this is mostly geared toward Domination, but there may be some overlap towards Campaign or Clan Battles as well. So let's get started. First up, we have the Grace of Quayen. Again, I'm not sure how I pronounce this exactly, so I'm doing my best. ROR Celestial Dragon Crossbowman gets a pretty hefty range and missile strength buff over the basic variant, as well as getting magical attacks, and this Mark of Yin ability, which is a minus all stats that matter when you're getting shot at debuff. Very, very nice for focus firing, and the range matched up perfectly with that of the actual unit itself. So it's a very, very nice unit to pop on a target, an elite enemy unit. Just focus fire with all your missiles and delete it. Very much synergizes with what the unit wants to be doing, so it's a nice buff to have. Now, this thing is actually pretty nice for an elite crossbow unit. Good missile damage, good range, does lose the shields, so it does do a little worse in missile trades, but the range actually helps make up for that. The problem it's going to face is that these kinds of super elite missile units are not that good in Domination at present anyway. They have a massive target on their back. They're not super durable, although the melee stats on this are quite nice. So they're just going to have a massive target on the back, and their ability to actually sit and fire long enough to actually recoup their value. The situation that comes up in is pretty rare, or it's because your opponent's making mistakes and playing sloppily. So while they are very good at the job that they are advertised at, that job comes up somewhat rarely. So I'm going to put these guys at B tier. If you're looking for a very elite crossbow unit, they do that job quite well. But you're not often looking for that job. Next up, we have the Onyx Crowmen, and by extension the Onyx Crowmen ROR. These guys I really like. So they're a flying infantry unit basically, kind of like Furies or Fellbats. The big difference I find with these guys is that they have really good stats. Good melee attack, good melee defense, weapon strength, and charge bonus, as well as leadership, something none of the other ones have. Furies and Fellbats are both notorious for crumbling away when they get low leadership, so having one that actually sticks around and fights opens up a lot of doors for Cathay. Not only does this help you protect your backline from those threats, from things like Fellbats or Furies, from other flying threats, it also allows Cathay to actually go on the offensive a little bit and disrupt enemy backlines and actually kill archer units outright by themselves. They're a very, very versatile unit, and I think we're going to be seeing quite a lot of them. For only 600, I think they're really, really good. As well as helping Cathay in the mobility game a little bit. Gavin's super strong, so having something that can go and harass backlines is a big deal for Cathay. It's not something they really had before, short of longbows, which are much more expensive and much more prone to getting stuck on the ground. Not that they're not entirely prone to getting stuck on the ground, but much more rarely. So I think Onyx Crowmen are actually going to be A tier. I think most Cathay builds will have at least one of them. And to be honest, the one I think that they're going to have is this ROR. The ROR is incredible. Compared to the basic, it has double the charge bonus, and then as well as all the other good melee stats and leadership. Also, it brings along these non-Gao grenades, which work kind of like a Pterodon rock drop, only they have some measure of AP, and they actually hit quite hard. Very, very good rock drop if you have the micro to actually line it up and do good damage with it. But honestly, just the stats on these guys are crazy. I have seen these guys just tear apart a lot of flying singlets. Things like the Blue Scribes, Exalted Lord of Change. They're just really good at sticking to those flying singlets and tearing them apart. They're small and they have high melee defense. They're very, very sticky and very annoying for those flying characters. So they can actually help you exert a lot of air superiority. So I think these guys are going to be a must-take for Cathay in a lot of matchups. Alright, next up we have the Jade Lion. So it is a single FD melee combatant with some bound spells of the Jade Lion's Breath, which is just a reskinned Dragon's Breath. It also has the contact effect of Flammable and it has the Jade Conduit ability, giving extra power recharge to Cathay. So I've not been super impressed by this guy. As for a melee combatant, it's alright. It's not a great duelist. It's not that great at infantry clear. It's kind of a generalist. Doesn't do either job particularly well. The spell is fine. It synergizes pretty nicely with the debuff effect. There's not that much else on the roster that actually synergizes with this flammable effect. The only units on the roster that deal fire damage are the ROR Peasant Archer, Sky Junks, and Firing Rockets, and a few other spells. So there's not a whole lot of place for the flammable debuff to come into play. So it's not super relevant. And as for its melee stats, it does fine in melee. It's a little squishy for 1200 gold. Only 5,000 hit points and only 70 armor means any kind of missile fire, especially if it's armor piercing, is going to tear it to pieces very, very quickly. Or things like armor piercing anti-large cavalry, of which there's plenty of the game, Cold War Knights, Boar Big Guns, that kind of thing, are going to be a real nuisance for this guy. So I've not been very impressed with him. So I'm going to put him in C tier. I don't think he'll see a whole lot of play. Now, as for his twin, the Jet Lion. The Jet Lion I actually like quite a lot better. It does have, for its own singlet combat abilities, it's very similar to the Jade Lion. The one thing it does have, compared to its brother, is that it provides yin harmony. It's the same harmony that missile units provide, which means that you can have a fast, mobile unit aggressively providing this harmony to things like your front line or your cavalry. That means that Cathay can rely a lot less on their missile units to provide harmony, which means that they can actually go much more aggressive. And that's a theme you'll see with this DLC, as it seems to have added a lot of options for Cathay to be a little less reliant on their missile units and more able to go on the aggressive. So this thing is really, really nice for enabling those more aggressive playstyles, running it alongside your cavalry, or even just grinding your front line means you get yin harmony, which adds a lot of stats to your front line. So I quite like this guy in a lot of situations. So overall, I think I'll put it in B tier. Again, I don't think it's a great unit in and of itself, but having that mobile harmony on a fast-moving unit is very, very useful. Next up, what is it? It's the War Drum. What's it called? It's the Zhang War Drum. Again, I'm very sorry for all the Cathay names. I am not an expert at pronunciations. I have some mixed feelings on this thing. The abilities it has aren't that great. The Disdain of the Dragon Emperor for ITP and melee attack. It's a fine buff. The effect range is excellent at 100 meters. The problem I find is that melee attack isn't what you really need as Cathay. You have so many stats from Harmony already, as well as Formation Attack. Actually, Formation Attack I don't think gives stats. My mistake. It's just, yeah, it's Defensive Stance and Harmony. Gives you plenty of stats anyway. So for 500 gold, like, your Jade Warriors are already pretty well statted. Your Halberds even and Spears even more so. You don't really need the melee attack. What they really need is weapon strength, and you can't find that. So buffing them to hit more often isn't super valuable because their hits deal very, very little damage. Especially since most of your melee units are already halberds, so they're already doing very, very well into those large things they're meant to do well into. They still, even with the melee attack buffs, don't do that well into infantry. And then the armor buff, most of your infantry is already armored, so unless it's peasant long spears, peasant archers, or iron hail gunners, not super useful. I think if you're bringing this, you're mostly using the melee attack and immune to psychology aura. Immune to psychology also, it's fine, but Cathay's leadership is good, again, especially with Harmony, which this thing provides both of. So I don't think that's a huge draw for you. It also has extra leadership buff, but again, as I just said, Cathay has good leadership, so you're not really hurting in that regard. The one thing that it is very, very good for is, again, it does provide both sources of harmony, so it's another melee unit that you can keep on your front line. It actually has even more hit points and armor than the Jet Lion. Slow, but it can sit on your front line and provide harmony to your front line, again, allowing you to be less reliant on keeping your missile units close or even bringing missile units at all. There were a lot of builds for Cathay that relied on balloons to keep harmony when you couldn't have missile units kept safe. Things like Greenskins or Beastmen that were just great at getting on top of your missiles. Well, now instead of bringing a balloon that just doesn't do a lot of damage, you can bring one of these, sit in the middle, and actually get buffs. So I think in those very specific melee matchups, these things are going to be a godsend. Outside of those very specific instances, though, I don't think you'll see them in use much at all. So, all that to say, I think I'm going to put these guys in C tier. They have a very specific niche application. I think they're very expensive for what they do. I think their buffs are pretty underwhelming. And that does kind of go for the Regiment of Renown as well. For the basic one, it has slightly better melee stats, but you don't really care about the melee stats on this thing. That's not really what you're buying it for. Extra armor is kind of nice. The only extra ability it gets is the Fury of Falling Blade. Magic attacks, 15% speed. That's it. And it can't be active at the same time as the other abilities. The speed is okay. Most units are so slow that 50% speed equates to 3, maybe 4 points of speed, which is fine, but usually you need speed on units that are reinforcing, and that's not where this is going to be. This is going to be out ahead of time. The extra speed isn't super relevant, and the magical attacks are only going to come up against a faction like Demons of Chaos, who have nothing but Fizz Resist all over the place, or maybe a faction like Greenskins, who also rely on Savage Orcs. But it's extremely niche. I honestly think the basic one is probably better, just because it's cheaper. So I think the ROR is actually going to be going in D tier. I don't see much application for that Regiment of Renown in any scenario. Because, like, Demons of Chaos is the one match where I could see it, but that matchup is already so hilariously Cathay favored that I just don't see a purpose for it. Alright, on to Kislev. We have the Akashina Ambushers. Akashina Ambushers, yes. So these are Kislev Shades, basically. They are a stocked, armor-piercing crossbow unit. They hit very, very hard from stealth. They have good range. They are indirect fire, unlike Streltsy, so they give you a nice indirect armor-piercing option, which Kislev didn't previously have, which is very, very nice. Vanguard deployment and stock also means they can reinforce your front line very, very quickly. And their stats are just quite good. 150 range, 32 armor-piercing missile strength. It's actually quite a bit more than Streltsy, even. Streltsy are sitting at 17. They have 6 more with missile strength than Streltsy. Solid melee stats. They're kind of squishy, so you don't necessarily want them in melee, but they're not just going to fold if they do get caught out, which is not uncommon with a unit that is more kitey like this one. And that is honestly the big draw of these guys, is they can enable a more kitey style of Kislev. They're quite quick, they can turn pretty quick and actually keep firing, and then retreat to stock and hit very, very hard and just play those guerrilla tactics and hit and run, which Kislev wasn't very good at before. So it does open up that whole new avenue of play, or you can just tack it on the back of the infantry formations Kislev already like to bring. I think this guy is very, very versatile, very good at his job, and I think we'll be seeing quite a lot of these guys. So we're going to put them not in B tier, in A tier. Now, there is also a Regiment of Renown for these guys. The Wolfhearts. They get pretty hefty boost in stats. Makes them a solid melee combatant, even more missile strength, and most importantly, they get Pack Trap. 100 meter range, 25 second duration, net, with 3 uses. If you've been playing Total War Warhammer for a long time, you know that nets and missile factions go together like peanut butter and jelly. Like, missile factions love nets so much. Trapping something in place, lighting it up with all of your missiles, and just watching his health bar disappear is a tactic as old as Net of Amantok, honestly. This is incredible for Kislev. All of their units already want to be shooting. They have so many missile units on the field. They max their missile units almost every game. Having nets where you can lock down that big expensive piece for your opponent, maybe an elite cav unit or a single entity, and just blow it to hell with all of your firepower, is game-changing. This is incredibly strong for Kislev. I think you will see it in a lot of games, and I'm also putting that in S tier. I think those guys are incredible. And on top of that, I mean, they hit super hard. 30 AP missile strength is incredible. So it's just all around a great unit. Alright. Next we have the, I'm not going to try to pronounce that. It's the Aurora Streltsy. So, they have massively increased missile strength, decreased range, and the extra stats that come along with being an ROR. So these guys, compared to the regular Streltsy, I kind of like them. They're much more self-sufficient with their 40 melee attack and defense, a much stronger melee combatant, but the lack of range hurts them. The missile strength is incredible, though. The biggest problem I foresee for these guys is that these guys exist. The Wolfhearts, I feel like, are going to be overshadowing these guys a lot. They have the same missile strength, but one is indirect fire and has longer range, and is faster, and has a net, and is the exact same price. So I feel like these guys are going to be quite niche. The only thing they're going to be much better at than the Wolfhearts at is killing a large single entity. The problem with that is that they have only 100 range, so that single entity is probably just going to be charging at them, and they're going to get one volley off. And while that volley will do good damage, it's not going to do 1150 value worth of damage. So I feel like these guys are going to have a very hard time finding their place when the pronunciations in this DLC are so hard. Akincha's ambushers are already doing so much of that armor-piercing missile roll on Kislev's roster. So I don't think these guys, or Streltsy in general, to be honest, are going to be seeing a whole lot of play going forward. I think the Akshina ambushers are really going to be taking over that armor-piercing missile roll for Kislev. Alright, what do we have next? The Incarnate Elemental of Beasts. The big boy. This guy, he hits incredibly hard in melee. 62 melee attack, 650 weapon strength, 35 bonus versus large. On top of that, he has a Mortis effect. 8 to 16 in a 35 meter radius as long as he's above 25% HP. Above 20% HP. He hits very hard. He's pretty quick at 60. The problem I found with him is that he's a glass cannon. 30 melee defense and a massive lumbering target means that any kind of missile fire or other single entity duelist are going to do damage to him very, very quickly. So he's kind of hard to justify in a lot of situations. If there's missile fire on the enemy team, you really can't bring him because he will just melt. I had a game on stream the other day against Subutai where this thing came out against Tomb Kings twice and got fully killed by Shabdi Great Bows both times because they just are such a big target with like very slow animations. They don't dodge missiles at all, so they just soak damage super fast. So that said, pairing it with a Patriarch to heal it up, give it a lot more durability, give a second lease on life, and it can actually do pretty well just grinding against monstrous infantry or even in the infantry front line. But against factions with strong missile play, I don't see it having a place. Against a faction like Beastmen, Greenskins, these kind of things, I could see it having a place, but I think it's going to be a more niche pick for Kislev. I don't think Kislev had a whole lot of difficulty killing large things in general, given that their faction is centered around missile units. They tend to be quite good at killing large entities and monstrous infantry, so it doesn't really fill that role. The Mortis on it is somewhat weak, so it's not going to be your hard grind tool. Yeah, it's in a little bit of an awkward middle ground. So, if you need a big, strong single entity duelist, it definitely checks that box, but otherwise, I don't think it's going to be the greatest. But I'll put it in B tier. I think it does its job well, but it's super fragile, which honestly I think is good design. Like, it hits really hard, but it's really fragile. That makes for a very fun dynamic that can, turn on its head very, very quickly. So if you play it well, it'll give you good value. But if you mess up, you get punished pretty hard. Honestly, I think that's a fine place to be. Alright. On to everyone's favorite terror in the night. Things in the Woods. These guys are great, honestly. They have middling stats, but for 700 gold, having an armor-piercing anti-infantry option on your front line, most importantly, that isn't a missile unit and doesn't count towards Kislev's very limited missile unit cap, is amazing. I don't have unit caps on right now, so you can't see it, but Kislev has had the problem since the dawn of time that they couldn't bring actual missile backline and all 10 armored Kossars for the front line because they only were allowed 12 missile units. They're still only allowed 12 missile units. Every faction's only allowed 12 missile units. But Kislev was restrained by that so heavily because their basic frontline unit, the armored Kossar, is a missile unit and counts towards that cap. Having these guys to come in and be a solid frontline unit a solid damage dealing frontline unit that doesn't count towards your missile cap and doesn't require shooting to actually do the damage is a godsend for Kislev. It's exactly what Kislev needed. They have good stats, they hit pretty hard, they're not super expensive, they're really fast. I think these guys are great. I think you're going to be seeing them a lot. I don't have a whole lot more to say about them. They're solid. I think they're going to be a staple of Kislev play. I'm going to put them in A tier. They are, like, reasonably squishy. They're not, unkillable like, Crypt Horrors from a couple patches ago. They die if they get in a bad spot, so good to know at least. The ROR. The ROR is actually really interesting because the main thing it brings to the table is this contact effect, which reduces all healing received and speed a little bit. This, while not universally applicable, in the scenarios where you're up against a faction with good healing, this is incredible. Nurgle, vampire counts, this is amazing. Yeah. Completely cutting off all healing punishes a lot of strong single entity play, any kind of big dragons, any kind of Malekith on its dragon, you can negate all of his healing if you actually manage to catch him, or any kind of Crypt Horrors, just tearing them apart, removing their regeneration. A very, very strong effect. The only problem I really see is that it's not universally applicable. So in the scenarios where these guys are useful, very, very strong. But those scenarios aren't universal, so I'll put them in B tier. Against vampire counts or Nurgle, they're probably S tier. But against what's a faction without healing? Against Norska, they're probably down here. So put it in the B tier because they're very strong at their job, but their job only comes up every so often. What do we got next? We have the Sour Guts. Tzeentch Pink Horror ROR. So, these guys have, extra stats from being a tier rank 9 unit, but also they get extra HP. They get 800 extra hit points, and then an extra 400 barrier hit points. Regular one has 1400 barrier, these guys have 800 barrier. So they have 1200 extra hit points, which makes them quite a lot durable. Combined with their extra stats in melee, actually makes them a much better hybrid unit than most Pink Horrors, which is very appealing. On top of that, they also have Sour Discharge, where they explode on death. I have had a very hard time telling how effective this is, to be honest. It's very hard to isolate what damage a unit is taking from these explosions as opposed to just being in combat. So I'm really having a hard time telling how effective this explosive damage is. But honestly, 200 gold for a unit that is much more self-sufficient, extra HP, extra melee stats, has honestly been just fine by me. And it hits harder too. Extra 5 missile strength adds up when you have an 80 model unit. So honestly, in spite of me not really knowing where to sit on the ability, the extra stats pay for themselves, in my opinion. So, if I'm bringing Pink Horrors, I honestly quite like the Sour Guts just because I don't have to babysit them quite as much. So, I think these guys are solid. I don't know if they're not strong enough to be a universal pick, I wouldn't say, but they're definitely good if you need a little more heavy skirmishing. What's next? Zan-gors. If you have watched any of my streams the past few days, you'll know that I think Zan-gors are the shit. 80 armor, silver shields, a lot of hit points and Tzeentch barriers. Good stats, speed, Vanguard deployment, Primal Fury, extra weapon strength when spells are cast. What don't they have, honestly? Like, they are a godsend for both Tzeentch and Beastmen, and probably Warriors of Chaos as well. They're pretty cheap, they're fast, they're armored, they have good stats. Like, for Tzeentch, I find that they fill the role of a more mobile infantry unit quite well. Usually they're restricted to just Chaos Warriors and Forsaken. And Forsaken were fine as a faster infantry unit option, but they're very, very squishy and they're unshielded. Having these guys that are much more durable and can grind and can actually go for those flanking plays more effectively is very, very nice. The armor helps them survive those fights against enemy cavalry most times. I think these guys are incredible. So, I think Zan-gors are probably the best unit from the patch. RORs excluded, it is just probably the best basic unit. Maybe even including the RORs, just because you can bring more of them. They are a game changer for all the factions they're added to. So, Zan-gors are incredible. What more can I say? On to the big bird. We got the Cockatrice. This is a flying single entity akin to a manticore. Its big selling point is both poison and petrifying gaze, which is minus 10 melee attack and 10% speed and 35 meter aura. Minus 10 melee attack is a big deal. That's a lot of melee attack. The debuff is great. I found this guy actually does quite well in single entity duels. Also, he has 7,100 hit points with extra berry. How much extra berry do you get? 800? So yeah, nearly 8,000 hit points. Very, very tough. Quick flying unit with a good debuff aura. Again, I think this thing is great. Not universal, like you don't need it in every situation, but when you need Terror Source, or when you need to debuff those blobs, or you're facing a faction with not great melee attack in the first place, debuff is crippling, the Terror is nice, the Poison is nice, it's a good duelist if you need to go after a character or snipe a monster. Yeah. There's nothing super neat about this guy, he's just a solid all-arounder, and I think I'll put him in... So here's the thing. He's good at what he does, so I want to put him in A tier. But the role of flying single entity is not essential in domination. You don't always need that job fulfilled. And you already usually have Terror as Tzeentch because you're usually bringing Kairos, or an Exalted Lord of Change, or some other Terror source. So just for his buffs and dueling prowess, or debuffs and dueling prowess, I should say, I think we'll put him in B tier. He's good at what he does, but his job isn't essential. So, I think we'll put him in B tier. I think I'm happy with that. The Mutalith Vortex Beast. This thing has surprised me quite a bit. So, big single entity monster, keeping loads of hit points. It has this effect, which debuffs every 30 seconds or so, as well as a bit of damage. It has a constant passive Mortis damage, which is very good damage numbers. It's on par with the best Mortis in the game. It's tied. And it gives melee attack buff to surrounding allied units, as well as just hitting like an absolute truck in melee. I have been very surprised by the damage output of this thing in every game I've played. Again, with it and against it. It hits crazy hard in melee, and has a huge bonus versus large, and it just has good animations. So I've seen it tearing apart Minotaurs regularly. It just demolishes monstrous infantry, does solidly in duels, and that's not even its primary job. It's a Mortis engine and a buff monster. Like, this thing is the complete package. It's a strong duelist, it's strong clear monster infantry, it has a Mortis to clear infantry. It's incredible. It is honestly insane. It's kind of pricey. 2,000 is paying quite the premium for it, but it's really, really good for that price. I have not seen it not make that value back. So, yeah, this thing is great. Especially if you bring it with Kairos, who can heal it up so it can go even longer. Now, it is a little on the squishy side. Only 70 armor and 35 melee defense. It's not as bad as the Incarnate Elemental of Beasts, but it can be caught out of position and punished, so... It's not immortal, but it does have impressive damage output. I think I'm going to put this guy in S tier, actually. Again, he's not universal. Again, those big melee monsters are always poor against shooting factions, so maybe we put him in A tier. Yeah, I think we'll put him in A tier, but it's another situation where he's very, very good at his job, but his job isn't universal, so we'll keep him in A tier. The ROR, however, so it loses the Mortis engine effect. The Mortis engine effect, the best thing about these kinds of monsters. And it gains this ability, Maelstrom of Change. So it does a lot more damage to the Mortis engine, but it's only active for 7 seconds. And what it does is it chains targets. You click an enemy, affects that enemy, and then every enemy within 30 meters of that gets affected by it. And then every unit within 30 meters of that gets affected by it. So it chains. So you could theoretically hit the entire enemy army, but it's only active for 7 seconds, and it's only a 30-meter spread range. That'd be very bunched up for it to happen. So it's kind of gimmicky in that regard. It has 3 uses, but I struggle to see a situation where it's better than the basic Mortis engine. It probably has higher potential damage output, at least quickly, but it requires extreme blobbing from your opponent. That would just require a lot of sloppy play from them. The extra melee stats are, of course, nice, but honestly, I have not found the basic one to be lacking. So I think this guy is going to fall quite a bit from grace. And of course, you're paying such a premium for it. 2,400 is an insane price. All right. On to our final unit. Ignore this. This is an asset for the summon that I accidentally uploaded. Just ignore that. It's not here. The ROR Screamers. These are, what are even their name? The Shrieking Sky Rays. So, their whole bit is that they have the Lamprey's Bite, excuse me. So it's labeled as an explosion. It is a breath spell, akin to something like Pink Fire, where it starts at a point and moves forward. The damage is not AP, but the damage isn't bad, and for a spell you get for free every 90 seconds, it does pretty good damage. On top of that, Screamers are already a good unit type, and having extra stats on them never hurts, especially leadership, since they are demonic, so they don't crumble away. So, spell it's whatever. It's a nice bonus, but 250, the extra melee stats and leadership I honestly find to be quite worth it. This spell it's a little underwhelming, but stats are nice, and the unit is already good in general, so just buffing it up is honestly quite worth it in my opinion. So I will give this guy an A tier, I think. I think it's pretty nifty. And yeah, like I said, ignore this guy. He doesn't exist. He's a summon, so we'll put him in D tier because he doesn't exist. But yeah, that is my stance on all of the new units that are coming in Shadows of Change. So, yeah. Let me know what you guys think. You guys think I'm right about all this stuff? Do you think I'm crazy? Have you seen something from the low tiers do incredibly well in somebody else's streams or videos, or do you think I'm crazy to rate Zan-gors so highly? So let me know in the comments down below, and as always, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz, and I will see you folks next time. Peace.